Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Don Joe part number HR140. This is a very typical and common piece of equipment that is going to be used by hollow metal door shops, used by field installers, field welders, locksmiths, maintenance people, anyone who needs to repair a hinge location on a steel door and frame. This is a very likely product that you're going to use. The HR140, and there is a table down below that shows the different hinge reinforcements, and if you draw your attention immediately to the HR120, 130, 140, and 150, you're going to see the 4.5 inch size four different hinge reinforcements. You've got two for standard weight, which is 134 thousandths. You've got two for heavyweight, which is 180 thousandths, even though their table and their catalog says 190 thousandths. On a 4.5, that's 180 thousandths. So our table reflects 180 thousandths because I'm sure that's what it must be. 190 thousandths is for a 5-inch hinge. So what makes this an HR140 versus an HR130? The only difference is that this is for a heavyweight hinge, that its offset is greater because you have a thicker hinge leaf. That's the only difference. The gauge of the steel is all the same, but this will handle a heavier hinge. Now this is a great product, and you can easily use this. This is intended to be used in a door or a frame. They do have a frame version only, the HR150. It's the same, except it's 1.5 inches wide. So for a door, you're not going to use, you most likely aren't going to use a plate that's 1.5 inches. Okay, because you may not be able to fit it inside, so you'll use 1.25 inches. You can easily use this for either doors or frames, or use it just for doors. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend being too concerned over which you use, but the proper size for a frame would be 1.5 inches and a bit wider as a result. So, you know, stocking both would be the concept. Now, there is a link below this video to a document called Templates, and that template will show you all of the dimensional properties of this item. 10-inch overall length, 1.25 inch overall width. This is going to be, they say 7 gauge or 179 thousandths. My caliper tells me it's 0.173. So this is 7 gauge is considered, you know, heavy for a door. This would be very appropriate for your application. Now I have welded these in, I have drilled these out, I have worked on these every which way, left to right and right to left. And very simply, this is really intended to be welded to the back of a frame or to the back. If you're doing a frame, this is meant to be with the frame laid open so that you can see the throat. You'll get this in position, and then you'll weld this down to the frame. What we would do to hold this in position is we would literally attach a hinge to this. Okay, we would work this. We'd get this over the hole, and then attach a hinge with a couple of screws. We're going to know that the hinge is flush. Any modifications that we need to make to these dimples we'll make by grinding them down, or whatever needs to happen for a perfect fit, if at all. That hinge also, assuming you've made your 4.5 inch prep, allows you to keep the plate vertically, what would be vertically, exactly where you need it. Then you can lay down your heavy bead, relatively heavy bead. You're welding this down to 16 gauge, and this is 7 gauge. You've got two very disparate material thicknesses, so you're going to need to be a bit delicate so that you don't burn through the thinner gauge frame. A trained set of hands will teach you how best to do that. But you do want to lay down a good weld because you're not welding to anything very thick. And I don't see any reason why you would not necessarily lay down a very good continuous type weld over much surface area, because you want this to be as stable as possible. The factory, when they're making this stuff, they're generally spot welding them, and those spot welds are certainly not amazing in terms of strength. A spot weld, depending on the heat and the time, it could easily deform your 16 gauge frame because you need to have penetration through 7 gauge. So spot welding is really not great, and that spot welds are really where problems start with standard economy grade doors. And you'll notice that heavyweight hinge reinforcements from manufacturers, whether they be substantially huge plates, whatever the case might be, or continuous, they're not spot welding that stuff. It's held down far, a method far superior. I would never spot weld this down, even if I had a spot welder. I would, if I had a problem with welding it, I would plug weld it, which means I'm going to drill a hole through the material that I want to weld this to, and I'm going to fill that hole with weld. I'm going to dress that weld, grind it, sand it, prime it. Okay, a spot weld is inferior to a plug weld. We would just weld it here is what we would do in a frame scenario. Occasionally we have to spot weld, plug weld something as well, for whatever reason. If you're doing this into a frame, if you're doing it into a door, you really have a different problem because you can't get to the door on the inside. You're going to be doing a plug weld. So what we would do in that case is we would drill 2 holes, top and bottom. We're going to get this plate brought into the door. We're going to secure it again with a hinge. We're going to use that hinge as a handle and to keep it vertically correct, flush with the door, then we're going to fill those holes with weld is what we're going to do. Okay, I would always recommend sanding down the surface. There is oil on this to help keep it from rusting, from ordering it to it getting to you. Clean the surface before you weld it. Any paint, any oil needs to be removed to get a good, clean, continuous current on your welder. So depending on what you're going to put this down to, that will dictate the method or methods. If you're going to try to install this into a frame and you don't have a welder, all is not lost. You could very easily drill and tap holes into this. You could, get the old unit out. You could get this put back in place, drill and tap some holes through your plates, and you can make that work. If it's going into the edge of a door, you can drill and countersink using a flat undercut head screw, a flathead machine bolt that is undercut, like a machine screw would be for a hinge. This same screw you're going to use for this, you'll want to use a flat undercut head screw for that. We can assist you with that. So however you're going to get this into the door, you're obviously replacing it or repairing it, possibly, because of a failed installation. So you'll probably want to look for ways to do the repair as solid as you can. Okay, obviously they're non-handed. You're just going to flip it over depending on how the hinge is going to lie. And it's hard to get them in wrong when you're using the hinge as a handle when you've got it applied to the plate ultimately. It does give you the location of those dimples, the diameter of the hole if you're going to plug weld. Okay, drill a hole through the frame. You've got the hole there for plug welding. Weld away. Location for the screw holes, so if you want to confirm that it's going to be accurate for what you're doing. The one thing that we've not discussed is the offset. They show that you've got 125 thousandths from the back of the plate to the from the back of the mounting area to the back of the plate itself. Okay, and I really can't measure that on here very accurately because maybe I kind of can. My caliper is just not wide enough at the base. But yeah, it's definitely 100, I'm coming up with 120 thousandths just holding the caliper on there. So you're going to have this plate installed down. You're going to have your heavyweight hinge that's going to be installed there. You've got your little dimples that are there as well. And all of that is going to conspire to allow you to install a standard 4.5-inch hinge that happens to be a heavyweight hinge. So if you're doing Hager, it'll be a BB 1168. If you're doing Stanley, an FBB 199. Bomber would be a BB 5006 possibly. Lots of variants of this material. As long as it's 4.5 and heavyweight, the H140 is the proper plate for you. And if we study how this may work on a heavyweight hinge, you've got a couple of dimensions, and they're leaving part of it out. 125 thousandths is from here down to here. I would argue that it would be the same as saying it's from here to here. Then you add the projection of your dimples. They have that at 0.025. Yeah, maybe a little bit heavy on that. Maybe 0.3. So 0.125 plus 0.025, that is 0.15. So 0.15. Well, your hinge is 0.180. That means your hinge is going to be sticking out. But what they're not showing there is the thickness of the material on the edge of the door. So that theoretically leaves 30 thousandths. That, 16 gauge is going to be 0.060 or so. You're dealing with an 18 gauge door. Yeah, it's certainly going to be thinner. But the point that I'm driving at is you can see how you might have to very marginally manipulate the depth of this plate because the math doesn't exactly add up. And the reason it doesn't is because the unknown is what's the thickness of the material that you're installing it through in a door application. If you're putting this onto a frame application and it's 16 gauge, the thickness of 16 gauge is 0.0625. So if you look at the frame being 16 gauge, you know your thickness is 0.0625. Add that to your hinge leaf. Add 0.065 to the offset, I should say. So 0.0625 plus 0.125. Now you're at 187 thousandths. So, you're really going to be right there. An indetectable amount of tweaking you might get into. If you're doing a different style hinge or you've got something unusual, you grind those dimples down, you pat it off a little bit slightly, whatever the case might be, just so that the hinge is flush is the bottom line. But that's how the math works out on that. So below this video is indeed a link to a table that brings all of these hinge reinforcing plates together from Donjo, so that's a very handy document there to review. A link to the template, as we discussed earlier, then the product catalog. Now finally, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Donjo products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. Any questions on the Donjo, number HR140, hinge reinforcement plate for a door or a frame, 180 thousandths, heavyweight, 4.5 inch, or any other Donjo product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.